Welcome to the next of our multi-part series on how to define a public health use case for interoperability. In this session, we'll look at a real-life example for newborn screening programs by walking through an actual documented use case so that you can get a sense of what one can look like. Let's get started. In this session, we'll be answering three major questions. What components make up a use case? What content does each of the individual components contain? And what purpose does each component fulfill? By the end of this presentation, you'll be able to describe the layout of a use case description and develop similar descriptions for your own use. Let's start with the parts of the use case description that we'll be reviewing. In this example, we'll be looking at a use case that comes from the newborn screening world. As we discussed in the first session of this series, there are some common sections that make sense for most use cases and applications. Here we see that this description has 7 different components. Note that the overall length of the document is relatively short, only a couple of pages. While the length of a given use case description will vary with the use case and the need, remember that the goal is to create an overview document that is easily consumed by your audience. In-depth discussions regarding workflow or technical details come later in the implementation process. As we go through each of the sections of the example use case, take some time to pause the video and read the text so that you can get a sense of the type of content that your own documents may contain. But first, let's go through a few disclaimers. What we're about to review is just one example. There is no single right way to document a use case. Each use case is unique, and so every description will be similarly unique. The length and the level of detail will vary based on your needs and the audience you're trying to reach, but most will include the core concepts that we'll be looking at. Now let's take a look at one example. The description component should be a high-level summary of the use case. It should provide enough background for a reader to understand the remainder of the document and touch on why the use case is important. The workflow component later in the document will dive more deeply into these areas, so you should be able to keep the description relatively broad in this section. The actors component outlines the players involved. For focused exchanges, this section may be relatively short, as it is in this example. However, for more complex use cases, the number of actors involved and the roles that they play may be considerably more complicated and require more detailed documentation. The workflow component is where you'll document the details of your current needs and processes. Your workflow description will likely be more detailed than this example, but remember, this is not the time to get into too many weedy details or proposed solutions. Here, you're just documenting what you're doing today and where the gaps or pain points are. The triggering event component outlines which events or activities initiate an exchange of data. These can be system-generated, such as the receipt of a V2 reportable results message, or they can be end-user generated, such as the creation of a case for communicable disease follow-up. Keep in mind that an exchange of data can happen in many different ways. It might be you pushing data to another actor that you know is interested, or it may be you seeking data from one of your partners. Identifying appropriate triggering mechanisms is one of the more difficult parts of developing robust data sharing solutions. The data payload component provides a high-level description of the data that needs to flow. Now is not the time to be documenting detailed requirements, but simply providing a sense of the type of information that your program provides or requires from others. In this example, because a data sharing standard already existed for newborn screening, we were able to be a little more specific through the inclusion of LOINC codes, but that probably won't be the case for most use cases. The data usage component outlines who will be using the data and for what purposes. This section is critical to understanding why the data is necessary and can help you make the case for prioritizing a use case. This section is also critical to the final component that we will look at. The final section is the benefits component. This section is absolutely critical for garnering support and resources for implementing a solution because it outlines the positive outcomes of improved data sharing. Be sure to document how your program and staff will benefit, but think more broadly. Be sure to also identify ways that your trading partners will benefit. This will be a key part of engaging with partners and securing their buy-in to participate in a project. Also think about how the individuals you care for will see their lives improved. Being able to share how patients and families will benefit is key to building support for an idea. Hopefully that example helped clarify the content of each of the sections. Before you put together your own use case descriptions, we'll leave you with a few key ideas. Remember to set the context. Provide enough information in the document so that a reader can know what you do, why you do it, and for whom. Be sure that the document focuses on the requirements of your program and of your trading partners. Brainstorming possible solutions comes later. This process is about setting the foundation. Building support for a project relies heavily on knowing the benefits and highlighting the return on investment. Remember, everyone has to have something in it for them if they're going to want to participate. And finally, remember your audience. Different use cases may require some customization to the process and varying degrees of details. Know upfront who you're trying to reach and what they will need to know. We hope that this series has been helpful in understanding the importance and mechanisms for documenting potential data sharing use cases. We encourage you to try this out for yourself and document a few ideas that would meaningfully improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your own activities. Thank you for joining us, and good luck.